You are disgracing this family by marrying a man who cleans toilets for a living. That was the last text my mother sent me before my wedding began. She thought she was saving the Vance reputation. She had no idea that the man in the dusty work boots standing at the altar was worth more than her entire social circle combined. They turned their backs on us, leaving me to walk down the aisle alone. But they did not know that in exactly 3 weeks, they would be begging that plumber for a glass of water, and he would be the one holding the deed to their house. Before I tell you how I turned their humiliation into my triumph, please like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you the most. It was raining that Saturday in October. Not a romantic drizzle, but a cold, biting rain that seemed to seep right through the white lace of my dress. I stood at the back of the small, drafty chapel, clutching my bouquet of wildflowers so hard the stems were snapping in my grip. I looked at the left side of the aisle, the bride's side. It was completely empty. 20 pews of polished oak, and not a single soul sat there. No mother to adjust my veil, no father to walk me down the aisle, no sister to hold my train. Just empty space and the sound of rain hammering against the stained glass. My phone buzzed in my hand, hidden within the folds of my dress. I should not have looked, but I did. It was a group message from my mother sent to me and every aunt, uncle, and cousin we knew. The screen lit up with her words, sharp and final. "We cannot be seen at such a low-class event. You are choosing a life of poverty with a man who smells of sewage, so do not expect us to smile and clap as you throw your future away. If you marry that plumber, do not call yourself a Vance anymore. Enjoy your mistake." I felt a sob rise in my throat, choking me. My own parents had boycotted the most important day of my life because my fiancé Dante drove a beat-up Ford truck and wore coveralls to work. They wanted a doctor or a lawyer for a son-in-law, not a man who fixed leaks under sinks. The shame burned my cheeks. I almost turned around. I almost ran out into the rain to disappear. But then I looked up at the altar. Dante was there. He was not wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt and dark slacks, his hands rough and calloused. To my parents, those hands were a sign of failure. To me, they were safety. He saw me trembling. He saw the empty pews. And he did something that made the few friends I had invited gasp. He stepped down from the altar, ignoring the tradition that the groom should wait. He walked all the way down the aisle to meet me halfway. He took my cold, shaking hand in his warm, rough one. He did not ask about my parents. He knew. He simply looked into my eyes and whispered loud enough for the silence to carry his voice. "Let them stay away, Maya. They think they are looking down on us, but I promise you one day I will build you a kingdom so high they will have to crane their necks just to see you." I squeezed his hand, drawing strength from him. I did not know then how literal he was being. I did not know that the man holding my hand had a patent pending that was about to revolutionize the industrial water systems of the entire East Coast. I just saw the man I loved. We walked the rest of the way together, two outcasts against the world. We celebrated with tacos from a food truck in the parking lot. It was humble, intimate, and full of love. But the ache of my family's rejection still throbbed in my chest like a fresh bruise. I thought the worst was over. I thought they would just ignore us and let us live our simple life. I was wrong. Exactly 2 weeks after my parents refused to attend my wedding because it was too low class, a heavy cream-colored envelope arrived in our mailbox. It was thick, expensive cardstock with actual gold leaf lettering that caught the light. It was an invitation to my younger sister Jasmine's wedding. The venue was the Plaza Hotel. The reception dinner cost $300 a plate. The groom was Brad, an investment banker my parents worshipped, and attached to the front of the invitation was a sticky note in my mother's sharp cursive handwriting. "Come and see what a real wedding looks like. Wear something appropriate if you can afford it." I stared at the gold invitation, feeling the insult slap me across the face all over again. Dante took the envelope from my hand, read the note, and a strange, cold smile appeared on his face. It was a look I had never seen before. He pulled out his phone and checked his calendar. "We are going," he said calmly. "But Dante," I protested. "I do not want to go there and be humiliated. They will just mock your job." "Let them," he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "Brad works in finance, right? I think it is time I introduced myself to the financial sector. Wear your best dress, Maya. We are not going there to celebrate. We are going there to watch the show." The ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was suffocatingly beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows were draped in heavy silk crystal chandeliers that cost more than my entire college tuition hung overhead, and centerpieces of white orchids towered over the guests like skyscrapers. My sister Jasmine looked like a princess in her custom Vera Wang gown, spinning around the polished dance floor with Brad, her perfect investment banker husband. My parents watched them from the head table with a look of pure adoration they had never once directed at me. To them, this was not just a wedding. It was a coronation. It was proof that they had succeeded in raising at least one child who understood the value of status and reputation. I stood near the entrance holding onto Dante's arm as if he were my lifeline. We were the black sheep in a room full of peacocks. Dante wore his best suit, a charcoal gray one we had bought off the rack at a department store. He looked handsome to me, strong and steady. But in this room of bespoke tuxedos and Italian silk, we stood out like a stain on a white tablecloth. My mother spotted us eventually. She did not smile. She simply scanned Dante's outfit with a critical eye, frowned in disapproval, and turned back to her champagne without a word of greeting. It was a silent message that said we were lucky to even be allowed inside. The music stopped for a moment as Brad walked over to the open bar near us, surrounded by a group of his loud Wall Street colleagues. They were laughing, those boisterous, confident laughs that echoed through the hall, the sound of men who believed they owned the world. Brad spotted us. His eyes didn't light up with recognition or warmth. They narrowed with amusement. He whispered something to his friends, and they all turned to look at Dante. Brad sauntered over, a glass of expensive scotch in one hand, his other hand digging into his pocket. "Well, look who decided to show up," Brad drawled, his voice carrying over the low hum of conversation. "The family plumber." He stopped right in front of Dante, looking him up and down with a smirk that made my blood boil. "You know, Dante, the timing is actually perfect. The men's room down the hall seems to be having some issues. One of the stalls is backed up." Brad pulled a crumpled $20 bill from his pocket and flicked it at Dante's chest. It fluttered to the floor between them. "Why do you not go take a look? Consider this a tip. I know you people need every dollar you can get." The surrounding guests, including my own parents who had just walked up to join the circle, erupted in laughter. It was not a nervous laugh. It was cruel, genuine amusement. My father clapped Brad on the shoulder, wiping a tear from his eye. "Good one." Brad put him to work. I felt a heat rise in my chest, so intense I thought I might explode. My hands balled into fists. I stepped forward, ready to scream, to flip the table, to tell them exactly who they were insulting. But Dante's hand clamped firmly around my wrist. His grip was gentle but unyielding. I looked up at him, expecting to see anger. Instead, his expression was completely unbothered, like a lion watching a yapping chihuahua. He did not look down at the money on the floor. He just smiled, a calm, terrifyingly polite smile. "I am off the clock today," Brad Dante said, his voice steady and deep. "But you might want to save that 20. You are going to need it." Brad laughed again, shaking his head as if Dante had told a funny joke. "I do not need small change, buddy. I am about to close the deal of the century." He turned back to his friends, and my father puffing out his chest, desperate to show off. "You guys heard of Aquaflow Dynamics, right? The tech giant revolutionizing industrial water filtration. My firm is handling their acquisition next week. We are talking $1 billion merger. I am going to be running that show. By next Friday, I will be swimming in so much cash I could buy this whole hotel." My father gasped, looking at Brad with pure worship. $1 billion. Son, you are incredible." Everyone raised their glasses to toast Brad's genius. Everyone except Dante. I felt Dante's body shift beside me. I looked up and saw him staring at Brad with a strange, unreadable expression. It was not anger. It was amusement. He brought his glass to his lips, took a slow sip, and whispered, just low enough for only me to hear. Is that so? It is funny he thinks he is acquiring Aquaflow, because I do not remember agreeing to sell my company to anyone. 3 days after the wedding reception at the plaza, my phone rang at 2 in the morning. Seeing my mother's name on the screen sent a jolt of panic through me, instantly waking me from a deep sleep. When I answered, her voice was faint and trembling, a stark contrast to the arrogant tone she had used at the party. She told me she was having palpitations, that her chest felt heavy, and that the stress of everything was finally taking its toll on her fragile heart. Despite everything they had done to me, despite the humiliation and the rejection, the daughter in me still panicked. I shook Dante awake, and without a word of complaint he grabbed his keys. We drove across the city in the dead of night, my heart pounding with worry that this might be the end. When we pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, the lights were blazing. I rushed to the front door, expecting to see paramedics, or at least my father in a state of distress. Instead, when I burst into the living room, I found my mother sitting comfortably on the floral sofa sipping a cup of herbal tea. Her color was fine, her breathing was steady. My father was pacing by the fireplace, looking annoyed rather than worried. The moment they saw me, there was no relief in their eyes, only a calculated look of satisfaction. Then their gaze shifted to Dante, standing behind me, holding his toolbox, because I had told him it might be an emergency. I realized instantly that I had been played. My mother set her teacup down with a deliberate clink. I am glad you are here, Maya, she said, her voice suddenly strong and commanding. Since you brought your husband, he can finally make himself useful. We have a situation in the basement. The main pipe has burst and the water is threatening to ruin the foundation. We need it fixed immediately. I stared at her, unable to comprehend the level of manipulation. You called me at 2 in the morning, pretending to have a heart attack because you have a plumbing leak, I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. You terrified me. I thought you were dying. My father stepped forward, waving his hand dismissively. Don't be dramatic, Maya. We called because we have an emergency. Plumbers charge triple for after-hours calls, and since you married one, we assumed he would want to do his duty by the family. The house is being appraised next week. We cannot have a flooded basement ruining the valuation. I felt a hot flush of anger. You want him to work for free, I said. After you mocked him. After you refused to come to our wedding. You think you can just snap your fingers and he will fix your mess. My mother let out a sharp, cruel laugh. Why should we pay him, Maya? He is family now, isn't he? Besides, look at him. It is what he does. He cleans pipes. It is not like we are asking a surgeon to scrub the floors. Consider it his way of paying us back for the embarrassment of bringing him into this family. Consider it an act of filial piety. I opened my mouth to tell them to go to hell, to grab Dante's hand and storm out of that toxic house forever. But Dante placed a calming hand on my shoulder. His face was unreadable, his eyes calm and observant. It is all right, Maya, he said softly. I will take a look. I want to see exactly what is going on with the foundation of this house. He walked past my stunned parents and headed for the basement door. I followed him, furious and confused. The basement was damp and smelled of mold and old secrets. Water was indeed pooling in the corner, dripping from a rusted joint in the main stack. But as Dante set down his toolbox, he did not immediately reach for a wrench. Instead, he walked over to my father's old workbench, which was cluttered with stacks of mail and documents that had been hastily shoved aside to make room for buckets. Dante, let's just leave, I whispered, watching him sift through the papers. They are using you. I know, he murmured, his eyes scanning a document he had pulled from the bottom of a stack. But I need to know why. Your parents are proud people, Maya. They would never ask me for help unless they were desperate. They need this house appraised because they are not just fixing a leak. They are trying to squeeze every last drop of equity out of this place. He handed me the paper. It was a document from a predatory lending company. My eyes widened as I read the bold text. It was a second mortgage on the house, a high-interest loan taken out only 3 months ago, and the amount was staggering, $200,000. Where did this money go? I whispered, looking around the basement, which clearly had not been renovated in decades. Dante pointed to a crumbled piece of paper in the trash bin next to the bench. I uncrumpled it. It was a bank transfer receipt. The recipient was an investment account under the name Bradley Sterling, my brother-in-law. They mortgaged their house to give Brad money, I said, feeling sick. They put their home on the line for his investments. Dante knelt down to inspect the leaking pipe, his voice low and grim. It is worse than that, Maya. Look at the date on the foreclosure warning underneath the mortgage paper. I dug deeper into the pile and found a red envelope. It was a notice of default. They had missed the last 3 payments. The bank was giving them exactly 30 days to pay the arrears or face immediate foreclosure. My parents were not just arrogant. They were broke. They were drowning in debt to fuel Brad's gambling on the stock market, and they were so delusional they thought fixing a leaky pipe would save them when the bank came to take the keys. Dante tightened the wrench around the pipe, his muscles flexing under his shirt. "We are going to fix this leak, Maya," he said, a cold determination in his voice. "We will make sure this house is in perfect condition. Because when the bank auctions it off in 30 days, I want to make sure it is worth every penny when I buy it. They think they are using me to save their home for Brad. They have no idea they are just polishing it for its new owner." 1 week before the supposed acquisition of Aquaflow was set to make Brad a millionaire, he insisted on taking the entire family out to celebrate his preemptive victory. He chose Le Jardin, a French restaurant so pretentious that the menus did not even list prices. My mother wore her pearls, my father wore his Sunday best, and Jasmine spent the entire car ride talking about which European country they should visit first with their new fortune. Dante and I sat in the back of the car in silence. Dante was wearing a simple button-down shirt, and I saw my mother eyeing his cuffs, checking for stains or fraying threads. She seemed disappointed when she found none. When we were seated at a prime table near the window, Brad took center stage. He snapped his fingers for the sommelier and began ordering wine in a loud, butchered French accent that made the waiter wince visibly. He did not ask anyone what they wanted. He simply ordered for the table, acting the part of the benevolent patriarch. When he got to Dante, he paused, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. He looked over the top of his menu, making a show of squinting at Dante, as if examining a specimen in a lab. "You know, Dante?" Brad said, his voice carrying across the quiet dining room. "I would let you order, but I doubt you can read anything on this page that isn't a picture of a hamburger." The waiter stood there, pen hovering, looking uncomfortable. Brad chuckled and continued. "Let us keep it simple for you. Give him the onion soup. It is the cheapest thing on the menu, so he should feel right at home with it. And bring him a spoon. A big one. We do not want him confused by all the silverware." My face burned hot with shame. I opened my mouth to defend my husband, to tell Brad that Dante spoke fluent French and had probably dined in restaurants that would not even let Brad in the front door. But Dante just placed his hand on my knee under the table. His grip was warm and steady. He looked at Brad with that same calm, unbothered expression he had worn at the wedding. "That sounds delicious," Dante said softly. "Thank you, Brad." Throughout the meal, the insults did not stop. Brad lectured Dante on how to hold a wine glass, making a production of demonstrating the proper swirl. My father chimed in, asking Dante if he had washed his hands thoroughly before coming, joking that he did not want any sewage bacteria on the breadbasket. My mother and Jasmine laughed into their napkins, treating my husband like a court jester brought there for their amusement. I watched Dante endure it all with a grace they did not deserve. He ate his soup quietly, ignoring their barbs, his eyes occasionally flickering to the manager standing by the podium. Then came the moment of truth. The bill arrived on a silver tray. Brad snatched it up without even looking at the total, pulling a platinum credit card from his wallet with a flourish. "This is on me, everyone," he announced loudly. Small change for a future CFO. He handed the card to the waiter with a wink. We sat in silence waiting for the receipt. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I saw the waiter whispering to the manager. Brad was busy checking his reflection in a spoon, oblivious. Finally, the waiter returned. He did not hand the folder back to Brad. He leaned down, his voice a hushed whisper that somehow sounded like a scream in the quiet room. "I am terribly sorry, sir." But the card was declined. The table went deadly silent. Brad turned a shade of red I had never seen before. "That is impossible," he sputtered. "Run it again. It is a bank error. I have a limitless limit." The waiter looked pained. "We ran it 3 times, sir. The bank says the account is frozen due to significant overdue payments. Do you have another form of payment?" Brad patted his pockets frantically. He pulled out another card. "Try this one." The waiter took it and returned 2 minutes later. "Declined again, sir." The air in the room was thick enough to choke on. My parents looked down at their plates, terrified. They had no money to cover a bill this size. Jasmine looked at Brad with horror. The bill was over $2,000. Brad was sweating now, beads of perspiration forming on his forehead. I have to call the bank," he stammered. "This is a mistake. A massive mistake." "Excuse me," Dante said quietly, pushing his chair back. "I need to use the restroom." He walked away from the table, leaving Brad hyperventilating, and my parents looking like they wanted to crawl under the table. I watched Dante go. He did not go to the restroom. He walked straight to the manager's podium. I saw him pull a sleek, heavy black metal card from his pocket. The Centurion card. The kind of card you only get by invitation when you have a net worth that makes bankers weep. He exchanged a few words with the manager, pointed discreetly back at our table, and slid the card across the counter. I saw the manager's eyes widen. He bowed his head slightly, processed the payment instantly, and handed the card back with both hands. Dante slipped it back into his pocket and walked back to the table as if nothing had happened. He sat down just as the waiter returned to the table, this time with a beaming smile. "Mr. Sterling," the waiter said, addressing Brad. "My apologies. It seems there was a glitch in our system after all. The manager has decided to comp the entire meal. It is on the house. We would not want to offend a man of your stature." The relief that washed over Brad was instant and pathetic. He slumped back in his chair, letting out a breathy laugh. "See," he crowed, looking around the table with renewed arrogance. "I told you. They know who I am. They know I am acquiring Aquaflow. They are terrified of offending me." My parents immediately started clapping, praising Brad's power and influence. Jasmine kissed his cheek, calling him her hero. Dante caught my eye across the table. He took a sip of his water and winked. Brad was preening like a peacock, completely unaware that the man he had just mocked for eating onion soup had just bought his dignity for $2,000. "See that, Dante?" Brad sneered, pointing a finger at my husband. "That is what power looks like. When you walk into a room, people pay for you. Maybe if you work hard one day, you can unclog a toilet for someone like me." 2 days after the dinner at Le Jardin, the facade of Brad's perfect financial life began to crack, and the debris fell squarely on my shoulders. I received a text from my mother demanding that Dante and I come over immediately for a family emergency. When we arrived expecting perhaps a health crisis, we found Brad sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, my sister Jasmine rubbing his back, and my parents looking at me with a mixture of desperation and expectation. There was no medical emergency. There was a financial hole, and they expected me to fill it. Brad lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with dark circles. He did not have the arrogant sneer he usually wore. He looked like a cornered animal. He explained with a lot of stammering and financial jargon that he had a temporary liquidity issue. He claimed he needed $50,000 immediately to cover a buy-in fee for the Aquaflow merger, or he would lose his position as the lead broker. It was a lie. I could see it in the way his hands shook. He did not need a buy-in fee. He needed to cover a loss before his firm found out he had been gambling with client money. My father wasted no time. "Maya," he said, his voice stern and authoritative. We know you still have the inheritance your grandmother left you. It is sitting in that savings account doing nothing. We need you to write a check to Brad today." I stared at them in disbelief. My grandmother had left me that money because she knew I was the outcast of this family. She had whispered to me on her deathbed that it was my freedom fund, my safety net, so I would never have to depend on people who did not value me. It was $50,000 exactly. It was not a fortune, but it was everything to me. "You want me to give my inheritance to Brad?" I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Grandma gave that to me. She worked her whole life as a seamstress for that money. Your grandmother would want the family to succeed." My mother interjected smoothly, walking over to place a hand on my shoulder. Her touch felt cold. "Listen to me, Maya. Sisters are forever. Husbands, especially ones like Dante, come and go. He is an outsider. He will never understand the burden of maintaining a legacy. Brad is the future of this family. If he succeeds, we all succeed. If he falls, he takes Jasmine and us with him. You have a duty to protect your own blood." I looked at Dante. He was standing by the door, his face impassive, but his eyes were sharp, watching every movement in the room. He did not speak. He let me fight my own battles, knowing I needed to find my voice. I turned back to my father. "No," I said firmly. "I will not do it. Brad drives a Porsche. He wears suits that cost more than my car. If he needs money, he can sell his assets. I am not emptying my grandmother's legacy to fund his gambling." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face turned a deep, violent shade of purple. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He had always been a man who demanded absolute obedience, and my refusal was not just a rejection of his request, it was a challenge to his authority. "You ungrateful, selfish girl," he spat, walking around the table toward me. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head. And now when your sister's husband needs a hand up, you hoard money like a miser. You would choose that plumber over your own flesh and blood. It is not about Dante," I cried out, stepping back. "It is about respect. You have never respected me, and now you want to rob me." My father lunged. It happened so fast I barely had time to flinch. He picked up a heavy crystal vase from the side table and hurled it in my direction. It smashed against the wall inches from my head, showering me with glass shards. I screamed, covering my face. But he was not done. Blinded by rage, he raised his hand, stepping into my personal space, his palm open and ready to strike my cheek to teach me the lesson he thought I needed. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the impact, bracing for the sting that I remembered from childhood punishments. But the blow never landed. Instead, I heard a sickening thud of flesh hitting flesh, but not mine. I opened my eyes. Dante was there. He had moved across the room with a speed that seemed impossible. His hand, the hand my family mocked for being rough and dirty, was wrapped around my father's wrist in a vice grip. He had caught my father's arm in mid-air, inches from my face. My father gasped, trying to pull his arm back, but Dante did not budge. The plumber, the man they thought was weak and beneath them, stood like a statue carved from granite. His eyes, usually so calm and warm, were now dark and dangerous. He leaned in close to my father's face, his voice dropping to a low, terrifying growl that vibrated through the room. "This is the last time you will ever raise a hand against her," Dante said. And for the first time his voice carried the undeniable authority of a man who commanded empires, not just pipes. "If you ever try to touch her again, I will not just stop you. I will dismantle your entire world." The very next morning, the Grand Theater of Brad's Delusion moved to the sprawling construction site of the new Aquaflow headquarters. This was the crown jewel of the company, a massive complex of steel and glass, rising from the earth on the outskirts of the city. Brad, desperate to secure his funding and prove his worth to his firm, had arranged an unauthorized tour for a group of skeptical, high-profile investors. He was not the lead broker. He was barely a junior associate. But he had convinced these men that he was the key architect of the merger, the man with the inside track to the elusive CEO of Aquaflow. I was not there, but Dante told me everything later, and the security footage I saw eventually confirmed every agonizing detail. Brad arrived in his leased Porsche, leading a convoy of black luxury sedans. He stepped out onto the dusty gravel wearing a navy blue suit that was too tight in the shoulders, and a pair of polished Italian leather loafers that were entirely inappropriate for a construction zone. He strutted toward the group of older, serious-looking men, waving his hand at the half-built skyscraper, as if he had laid the bricks himself. "Gentlemen, welcome to the future," Brad announced, his voice booming over the sound of distant jackhammers. "This is where the magic happens. As I told the board during our private strategy session last week, this facility will triple our processing capacity. I personally advised them on the layout of the filtration units." The investors looked around unimpressed by the dust and noise. One of them, a stern man named Mr. Sterling, looked down at his own shoes, which were getting coated in a fine layer of gray dust. He frowned. Brad noticed the shift in mood. He needed a distraction. He needed to assert dominance to hide the fact that he had no idea where the entrance to the site actually was. That is when he saw him. Dante was standing near a stack of steel beams, wearing a faded orange safety vest over his work clothes and a white hard hat. He was holding a set of blueprints, deep in conversation with the site foreman. To anyone else, he looked like just another construction worker. To Brad, he looked like a prop. An opportunity. Brad let out a sharp, mocking laugh that drew the attention of the investors. "Well, would you look at that," he said, grinning. "It seems my family charity extends even to the job site. Excuse me, gentlemen. I need to have a word with the help." Brad marched over to Dante, stepping carefully to avoid puddles of mud. He stopped a few feet away and whistled a sharp, degrading sound like one would use to call a stray dog. "Hey, Plumber," Brad shouted. Dante stopped talking to the foreman. He turned slowly. Under the shadow of his hard hat, his eyes were calm, but there was a sharpness to them that should have warned Brad to back away. Instead, Brad took it as submission. "I didn't know you managed to beg a job here," Brad said, loud enough for the investors to hear. "Did my father-in-law make a call for you? Good for you. Honest work for simple people." Dante rolled up the blueprints and held them at his side. "I am just making sure everything is built to standard, Brad. What are you doing here? This is a restricted zone." Brad laughed, turning back to wink at the investors. "Listen to him. He thinks he is security now. I am here because I practically own this place, Dante. Or I will by next week. But right now I have a problem." Brad pointed a manicured finger at his shoes. His left loafer had a smear of wet gray mud on the toe. "My shoes are dirty," Brad said, his voice dropping to a sinister, commanding tone. "I cannot present $1 billion opportunity to these men looking like a slob, and since you are already dressed for the dirt, why do not you be a good little brother-in-law and clean that off for me?" The site went quiet. The foreman standing next to Dante stiffened, his jaw dropping in shock. He looked from Brad to Dante, waiting for the explosion. The investors watched with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Dante looked down at the shoe. Then he looked up at Brad. He did not move. He did not kneel. "I think you misheard me," Brad snapped, stepping closer. "I said, clean my shoe. Or do I need to call the temp agency that hired you and have you thrown off my site before lunch?" Dante took a step forward. He invaded Brad's personal space, towering over him. For a second, Brad flinched, fear flickering in his eyes. But Dante simply leaned in, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of the steel beams around them. "I am not wiping your shoes, Brad, and you should be very careful where you step. This foundation was built to hold up skyscrapers, not the egos of fake men. It tends to swallow liars whole." Brad's face turned red. He opened his mouth to scream, to fire him, to cause a scene. But before he could get a word out, a man in a white shirt and tie came running from the portable office trailer. It was the chief engineer, a man Brad knew was high up in the Aquaflow hierarchy. The engineer looked panicked, waving a clipboard. Sir, the engineer shouted, running straight toward Dante. "We have a problem with the pressure variance on the north grid. We need your signature immediately, or we have to shut down the..." Brad puffed up, assuming the engineer was running to him. Finally, some respect. But the engineer was not looking at Brad. He was looking directly at Dante. He was about to say Mr. Williams. He was about to say boss. Dante raised one hand. A sharp, precise gesture. Stop. The engineer froze mid-stride. He looked at Dante, then at Brad, then back at Dante. He saw the slight shake of Dante's head. He swallowed hard, realizing he had almost blown the cover. Sir, the engineer stammered, pivoting awkwardly to look at the ground. I meant, I need to tell the foreman. Dante nodded at the foreman. Handle it, he said simply. The foreman and the engineer hurried away, looking terrified. Brad, oblivious to the bullet he had just dodged, let out a scoff. See, Brad sneered. Even the management ignores you. You are lucky I am in a good mood, Dante. Now get out of my sight before I have you banned from the tri-state area. Brad turned back to the investors, putting on his best winning smile. Sorry about that, gentlemen. Just a minor personnel issue. It is hard to find good help these days. Shall we go see the boardroom? Dante watched him walk away. He watched Brad lead the investors toward a building that wasn't even finished yet. He pulled his phone from his pocket and typed a single message to his assistant. Let him have his tour. Let him feel like a king for one more hour. Then lock the gates. The vibration of my phone against the nightstand was so constant it sounded like a drill boring into the wood. I woke up with a start, my heart hammering in my chest, convinced that someone had died. When I looked at the screen, the light was blinding in the dark room, but the number of notifications was clear enough to stop my breath. 109 missed calls, 342 text messages. The names scrolling past were a roll call of my entire extended family. Mom, Dad, Aunt Sarah, Uncle Marcus, even cousins I had not spoken to since high school. I opened the first message from my mother and felt the blood drain from my face. The text was written in all capital letters. Jasmine is dying. Car accident. Internal bleeding. They need $50K for emergency surgery or she will not make it through the night. Send the money now. Maya, do not be a murderer. My hands shook so violently I dropped the phone. Panic, raw and suffocating, clawed at my throat. I pictured my little sister, the golden child, lying on a cold operating table, her life slipping away because I was too stubborn to help. I scrambled out of bed, hyperventilating. Dante was instantly by my side, his hands gripping my shoulders to steady me. I gasped out the story, showing him the barrage of hateful messages that were still pouring in. One from my aunt read, I always knew you were jealous of her, but to watch your sister die over money is evil. Another from my father simply said, if she dies, you are dead to us. I need to go to the bank, I sobbed, reaching for my laptop. I can transfer the inheritance money. I cannot let her die, Dante. I cannot live with that. Dante did not move. He did not reach for his keys. Instead, he gently took the laptop from my hands and closed it. Maya, listen to me. He said, his voice calm but firm. Look at the time. It is 3 a.m. No hospital in America demands a $50,000 wire transfer before performing life-saving surgery on a trauma patient. That is illegal. They would operate first and bill later. I stopped, the logic piercing through my panic. But Mom said... Dante picked up my phone. Which hospital did they say she is at? I scrolled through the hysterical texts. Mercy General, I whispered. Dante put the phone on speaker and dialed the main line for Mercy General. I held my breath as it rang. A tired voice answered. Dante was polite but direct. I am calling to check on a patient admitted tonight. Jasmine Sterling. It is an emergency. There was a pause, the sound of typing keys echoing through the silence of our bedroom. I waited for the confirmation that would shatter my world. I am sorry, sir, the receptionist said. We have no patient by that name in the ER, the ICU, or the trauma ward. Are you sure you have the right hospital? Dante asked her to check again. He asked her to check under her maiden name, Vance. Nothing. He hung up and dialed the other two major trauma centers in the city. The answer was the same. No Jasmine Sterling. No car accident. No emergency surgery. I sat on the edge of the bed feeling a different kind of coldness settle into my bones. It was not fear anymore. It was a horrifying realization. They had lied. They had concocted a story about my sister's violent death to emotionally terrorize me into handing over my grandmother's money. They knew exactly which buttons to push. They knew I would never forgive myself if something happened to her, and they weaponized my love to cover Brad's gambling debts. Just then, Dante's phone pinged. He looked at it and sighed a sound of pure disgust. He turned the screen toward me. It was his burner Instagram account, one he used to keep an eye on competitors, but he also followed Jasmine's public profile. She had posted a story just 10 minutes ago. The photo showed a dimly lit room with candles and a glass of champagne. The caption read, "Late night detox at the Sanctuary Spa. Much needed relaxation before the big billionaire life starts next week." She was not bleeding out on a table. She was getting a massage at a 24-hour luxury spa drinking champagne while our parents told me she was dead. I looked at my phone, which was still buzzing with accusations of being a murderer. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud break. It was quiet. It was the sound of the final thread connecting me to them severing completely. I did not cry. I did not scream. I picked up the phone. I did not reply to my mother's frantic guilt trips. I did not defend myself to my aunts. I simply went down the list. Mother, block. Father, block. Jasmine, block. Brad, block. One by one I silenced the noise. I erased their access to me. I erected a digital wall that they could never climb over. The silence that filled the room afterwards was heavy, but it was peaceful. I laid back down, staring at the ceiling, feeling orphaned, but strangely free. Then a single text message pushed through from a number I did not recognize. It was from Brad. He must have realized I blocked him and used a burner phone. "You think you are smart cutting us off," the text read, "but you just made the biggest mistake of your life. When the Aquaflow deal closes next week, I will be a billionaire. I will buy your building. I will buy your husband's little plumbing company. And I will make sure you spend the rest of your life regretting the day you didn't help me." I showed the message to Dante. He read it, and for the first time that night he laughed. He tossed the phone onto the nightstand and pulled the covers up. "Let him dream for a few more days," Dante whispered, kissing my forehead. "Waking up is going to be painful." The silence I had imposed on my family lasted exactly 48 hours before they found a way around my digital blockade. Since they could not call or text, they sent a courier to our apartment door with a physical envelope. It was heavy cream-colored and smelled of my mother's overpowering lavender perfume. Inside was not an apology for lying about my sister dying. It was not a check to repay the emotional terror they had inflicted. It was an invitation, or rather a summons. The card was printed on glossy photo paper featuring a picture of Brad standing in front of the Aquaflow construction site, the same one where he had tried to make my husband clean his shoes. The text embossed in gold foil announced the Brad Sterling viewing gala. It explained that tonight, the National Business Network was airing a special episode of American Titans, an investigative documentary series that profiled the most powerful hidden figures in the economy. The episode was titled, "The Invisible Empire of Water." Brad, in his infinite delusion, had convinced himself and my entire family that this documentary was about the merger he was supposedly brokering. He believed the world was about to see him shaking hands with the elusive CEO of Aquaflow, cementing his status as a financial god. But it was the handwritten note clipped to the back of the invitation that made my stomach turn. It was from my mother. Her handwriting was sharp and jagged. "Since you refuse to help your sister in her time of need, the least you can do is support the man who is actually saving this family. We expect you and Dante at the house by 5 o'clock. Please wear black slacks and white button-down shirts. The catering staff is short-handed, and we need you to pass the hors d'oeuvres. Do not embarrass us." I stood in our kitchen shaking with rage. They wanted us to come to their party not as guests, but as servants. They wanted to parade Brad's success in front of us while we refilled champagne glasses and wiped up crumbs. It was a power move designed to put us back in our place, to remind the plumber and the scapegoat that we existed only to serve the golden children. I was about to tear the invitation in half when Dante took it from my hand. He read the card, and a slow, dark smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a predator who sees the trap snapping shut. "Do not tear it up," Dante said, his voice strangely cheerful. "We are going." "Are you insane?" I asked, staring at him. "You want to go there and serve crab cakes to the people who lied about Jasmine dying? You want to watch Brad gloat on national television?" Dante walked over to the closet and pulled out a garment bag he had hidden in the back. He unzipped it to reveal a dress I had never seen before. It was a stunning floor-length gown made of emerald green silk, tailored to perfection. Next to it hung a tuxedo that looked like it belonged on a red carpet, not a construction site. "We are not going to serve food," Maya Dante said, holding the dress up against me. "You are going to wear this. And I am going to wear this. We are going to walk through that front door, not as the help, but as the guests of honor." Because Brad is right about one thing. That television episode is going to change everything. He just has the main character wrong. I looked at the dress, then at Dante's confident eyes. For the first time I understood. He knew exactly what was going to be on that screen. He knew because he was the invisible empire. The man they called a failure was about to be revealed as the titan they worshipped. I took the dress, my hands trembling not with anger, but with anticipation. "I will get ready," I whispered. "Good," Dante said. He kissed my forehead and walked out onto the balcony with his phone. Through the glass door, I watched him make a call. His posture was rigid, his expression cold and businesslike. I could not hear his words, but I saw the way he checked his watch. "Yes, Sarah," I heard him say as I cracked the door open. "The timing has to be precise. I want the package delivered to the Vance residence at 8:30 exactly. Yes, the full foreclosure dossier and the debt acquisition papers. Send it by special messenger. I want them to sign for the loss of their home exactly as the credits roll." He hung up and looked out at the city skyline. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the world. My family thought they were preparing for a coronation. They had no idea they were setting the stage for their own execution. And tonight, for the first time in my life, I was going to enjoy the show. Standing in front of the full-length mirror in our bedroom, I smoothed the emerald silk of my gown for the 100th time. The fabric was cool against my skin, expensive and heavy, draped perfectly to accentuate curves I usually hid under oversized sweaters. I looked like a woman of substance. I looked like a queen. But inside, my stomach was twisting into knots tight enough to choke me. The imposter syndrome was a cold whisper in my ear, sounding exactly like my mother. She had spent 29 years telling me I was ordinary, that I was lucky to even be invited to the table, let alone sit at it. Even with Dante's reassurance, even knowing the secrets we held, I felt like a child playing dress-up in her mother's closet. I looked at the reflection of the man standing behind me. Dante was adjusting his cufflinks, his tuxedo sharp and intimidating. He looked like James Bond, but in my mind I still saw the man in the orange safety vest. My mind drifted back to the day we met 5 years ago. I was living in a studio apartment the size of a shoebox, and my bathroom sink had exploded. I had called the cheapest plumber in the yellow pages. Dante had shown up covered in drywall dust, smelling of copper and sweat. He had spent 3 hours under my sink. When I went in to offer him a glass of lemonade, I did not find him on his phone or complaining about the job. I found him sitting on the linoleum floor, his wrench set aside, reading a thick, battered paperback book. I had squinted at the title expecting a comic book or a sports magazine. Instead it read, quantum mechanics and the principles of fluid dynamics. I remembered asking him, "You read physics for fun?" He had looked up startled, his dark eyes wide with embarrassment, as if I had caught him doing something shameful. "I just like to know how things flow," he had mumbled, closing the book quickly. "Most people see water as just wet. I see the math in it." I did not laugh at him. I sat down on the floor next to him and asked him to explain the math to me. We talked for 4 hours that day. I fell in love with him not because of what he had in his bank account, which I assumed was empty, but because he was the most brilliant man I had ever met, hiding in the disguise of a laborer, to survive a world that judged him by his boots. Dante's voice brought me back to the present. He saw the fear in my eyes. He walked over to the desk in the corner of our room and picked up a large rolled tube of paper. He uncapped it and spread the sheets out on the bed. "I want you to see this before we go," he said softly. I looked down. It was a set of architectural blueprints. It was a design for a skyscraper, a twisting glass tower that looked like a waterfall frozen in time. It was beautiful. It was breathtaking. And it was familiar. "This is my design," I whispered, my hand flying to my mouth. "I drew this for my senior thesis. My professor gave me a C. My father said it was unrealistic and a waste of paper." Dante traced the lines of the drawing. "It was not unrealistic, Maya. It was visionary. This is the new global headquarters for Aquaflow. We broke ground 3 months ago." I stared at him, tears pricking my eyes. "You are building my tower." "No," he said, pointing to the bottom right corner of the blueprint. "I am building your legacy. Look at the name." I leaned in. In bold block letters, the building was titled the Maya Center for Innovation. My parents told me I was a gardener because I was a landscape architect. They told me I had no head for business. And here was my husband, the secret billionaire, entrusting the face of his empire to my imagination. "You are not the plumber's wife tonight," Maya Dante said, rolling up the plans. "You are the architect of everything we are about to become. Now are you ready to go show them who you really are?" I took a deep breath, the knots in my stomach loosening, replaced by a steel rod of determination. I nodded. We took the elevator down to the private garage. Usually we took the Ford truck. Dante loved that truck. But tonight he walked past it to the far corner of the garage, where a heavy canvas tarp covered a large vehicle. He pulled the cover back. Beneath it sat a vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom, black as midnight with chrome that gleamed like a weapon. It was a car that screamed old money. It was a car that said you owned the road, the bank, and the city. Dante opened the passenger door for me. The leather smelled of success. As we drove through the city, the streetlights blurring past us, neither of us spoke. We were soldiers heading into enemy territory. When we reached my parents' neighborhood, the street was lined with cars. I saw Brad's leased Porsche parked prominently in the driveway right next to the walkway so everyone could see it. "Drive right up," I said, feeling a surge of adrenaline. "Block him in." Dante shook his head, slowing the car down. "No. We do not park in the driveway. We park down the street in the shadows." "Why?" I asked. "Because," Dante said, cutting the engine and turning to look at me, his eyes gleaming in the dark. "If we pull up in a Rolls-Royce, they will be confused. They will ask questions before the show starts. I want them to think we walked here. I want them to hand us the trays of appetizers. I want them to treat us like dirt one last time. Because the lower they push us, Maya, the harder they are going to fall when the truth comes out on that television screen. Let's make the walk. It is a nice night for a revolution." We walked up the concrete path to my parents' house, the sound of our footsteps lost beneath the dull roar of the party inside. Through the large bay window I could see the silhouette of my family. They were packed into the living room, a sea of Sunday hats and polyester suits, all orbiting around Brad like planets circling a dying sun. He was holding court in the center of the room, a champagne flute in one hand, gesturing wildly with the other. Even from outside I could tell he was retelling the story of how he supposedly orchestrated the Aquaflow merger, embellishing every detail for an audience desperate to touch the hem of his garment. Dante squeezed my hand. His palm was warm, his grip steady. He did not look like a man walking into a lion's den. He looked like a man walking into a theater to watch a comedy. We reached the front door, and without knocking, Dante pushed it open. The heat of the room hit us first, thick with the smell of fried chicken, heavy perfume, and desperation. The noise level dropped instantly as heads turned toward the door. For a second I saw confusion ripple through the crowd. They saw a woman in an emerald silk gown that shimmered under the chandelier light, and a man in a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. They did not recognize the plumber and the scapegoat. For a brief, beautiful moment they saw us as we actually were. Then my mother broke the spell. She marched through the crowd, her face twisted into a scowl that deepened the moment she got close enough to inspect us. She did not compliment my dress. She did not ask how we could afford such clothes. In her mind we were incapable of success, so she rationalized it instantly. "I see you rented costumes for the occasion," she hissed, stopping inches from my face. "Trying to look like you belong." "It is pathetic, Maya. You look like children playing dress-up." She reached behind a potted plant near the entryway and pulled out two balled-up stained white aprons. She thrust them into my chest, forcing me to grab them to keep them from hitting the floor. "You are late," she snapped, her voice loud enough for the nearby relatives to hear. "The caterers are overwhelmed. We need trays of appetizers circulated immediately, and the dishes in the sink are piling up. Put these on. Cover up those ridiculous rental clothes before you stain them and have to pay a fee. If you work hard, you can have a plate of leftovers on the back porch when the show is over." The old Maya would have shrunk away. The old Maya would have put on the apron, lowered her head, and marched to the kitchen to scrub grease off plates while her sister drank champagne. I looked down at the stained cotton in my hands. It smelled of old bleach and subservience. I looked at Dante. He was watching me, his eyes shining with pride, waiting for me to make the move. I looked back at my mother. I saw the fear behind her anger. I saw a small woman terrified of losing control. "No," I said. The word was soft, but it cut through the room like a knife. My mother blinked, taken aback. "Excuse me?" I opened my hand and let the aprons fall. They hit the hardwood floor with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel striking a desk. I stepped over them, my high heels clicking sharply on the wood. "I said no." I repeated, my voice rising clear and steady. "I am not here to wash your dishes, Mother. I am not here to serve your guests. And I am certainly not here to eat your scraps on the back porch. I am here as a guest. Actually, I am here as the only person in this room who knows what is actually about to happen on that television screen." A gasp went through the room. Aunt Sarah covered her mouth. My father started to push his way through the crowd, his face red with fury. "You ungrateful little—" My mother started reaching out to grab my arm. "Don't," Dante said. He did not shout. He did not move aggressively. He simply spoke the word with such absolute cold command that my mother froze mid-motion. Her hand hovered in the air, trembling. Brad laughed from across the room, breaking the tension. "Oh, let them stay, Brenda. Let them play pretend for one night. It will be funny to watch their faces when they see what real success looks like. Come on in, Dante. Grab a seat in the back. Try not to get any plumbing dust on the furniture." My mother sneered, kicked the aprons aside, and turned her back on us. "Fine, stand in the back, but do not expect anyone to talk to you." We did not stand in the back. Dante guided me to the side of the room, leaning casually against the wall, perfectly positioned to see both the television and Brad's face. The room settled down, the murmurs dying out as the lights in the living room were dimmed. Everyone turned their attention to the massive flat-screen TV mounted above the fireplace. Brad stood right next to it, beaming, literally vibrating with excitement. Jasmine clung to his arm, looking at him like he was a god. Suddenly the screen went blue. The dramatic orchestral music of American Titans began to swell, filling the room with a sense of grandeur. A digital countdown timer appeared on the screen. 5, 4, 3. Brad raised his glass. Here we go, everyone. Prepare to meet the new king of Wall Street 2. 1. The screen faded to black, and then a deep voiceover began. In a world of noise, some power moves in silence. Tonight we reveal the face behind the invisible empire. I looked at Brad. He was smiling. I looked at Dante. He checked his watch. The show had begun. The commercial break before the main segment seemed to stretch on for an eternity, but Brad used every second of the delay to cement his status as the patriarch of the family. He muted the television with a flourish and turned to face the room. His chest puffed out so far, I thought the buttons on his shirt might pop off and take out an eye. He cleared his throat, demanding absolute silence, and naturally my parents were the first to hush the crowd. My father leaned forward in his armchair, his eyes wide with reverence, looking at his son-in-law, as if he were about to deliver the Sermon on the Mount. Before we watch history being made, Brad began swirling his champagne glass with a practiced arrogance. I want to share a little context that the cameras might not capture. You see, the media likes to paint the CEO of Aquaflow as this lone wolf genius. And sure, the guy knows his pipes. But when he came to me 6 months ago, he was drowning. He had the technology, but he had zero business sense. He didn't know how to scale. He didn't know how to navigate the sharks on Wall Street. Brad paused for effect, taking a sip of his drink while the room hung on his every lie. Jasmine, standing by his side, looked like the cat who had swallowed the canary. She placed a hand on his arm, beaming at the relatives, silently telling them that she had won the lottery of life. I remember our first meeting, Brad continued, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. We were at a private table at the Harvard Club. He was nervous. Shaking, actually. He looked at me and said, "Brad, I have built a machine, but I don't know how to drive it. I need a captain. I need someone who understands the flow of money as well as I understand the flow of water." And right there, over a glass of 30-year-old scotch, I mapped out the entire acquisition strategy on a napkin. I told him, "Son, you stick to the blueprints. Let me handle the empire." A murmur of awe rippled through the room. My mother wiped a tear from her eye, whispering to my aunt that Brad was practically a saint for helping a struggling inventor. I felt bile rise in my throat. The audacity of his lies was so vast it was almost impressive. He was describing a man who didn't exist, a meeting that never happened, and a relationship that was entirely a figment of his desperate imagination. I looked over at Dante. He was leaning back against the wall, one leg crossed over the other, looking completely relaxed. He held a glass of the cheap acidic red wine my father had bought in bulk, swirling it slowly. He brought the glass to his lips, his eyes never leaving Brad's face. He didn't look angry. He didn't look like he wanted to jump up and correct the record. He looked like a man watching a toddler explain quantum physics. He took a sip, grimaced slightly at the taste, and then caught my eye. He gave me a microscopic wink, a secret signal that said, "Let him dig the hole a little deeper." Brad was on a roll now, fueled by the adoration of the crowd. "Tonight isn't just about a merger," he announced, his voice rising to a crescendo. "It is about validation. When you see my name in the credits, or when they mention the financial architect behind the deal, just remember that success isn't an accident, it is a choice. And while some people choose to work with their hands playing in the dirt, others choose to shape the skyline." He cast a pointed, sneering look at Dante and me in the corner. The room chuckled, a low, cruel sound of agreement. My father nodded, casting a disappointed glance our way, as if to say, "Why couldn't you be more like Brad?" Jasmine squeezed Brad's arm. "Tell them about the bonus, honey," she squealed. Brad grinned, a shark showing his teeth. "Oh, right. Let's just say that after tonight, the Sterling family will be looking for a summer home in the Hamptons, and unlike some people, we won't be fixing the plumbing there. We will be owning the beach." The room erupted in applause. My mother clapped the loudest, looking at Brad as if he were the Messiah. Brad bowed dramatically, soaking it all in. He unmuted the television as the dramatic theme music reached its peak. "This is it," Brad shouted over the music. "Watch closely. You might see a familiar face standing next to the man of the hour." The screen faded from black to a sleek, high-tech studio. The host, a serious-looking woman with sharp glasses, looked directly into the camera. The graphic behind her swirled with images of water and money. "Welcome back to American Titans," she said, her voice grave and important. "Tonight, we have an exclusive, unprecedented look inside the most secretive company in the industrial world. For years, Aquaflow Dynamics has operated in the shadows, revolutionizing our infrastructure, while its founder remained a ghost. Rumors swirled that he was a foreign oligarch or perhaps a committee of investors. But tonight, for the first time ever, the ghost steps into the light." Brad pointed at the screen. "Here it comes," he whispered. The host continued. "He is a man who built an empire from nothing, a man who holds over 50 patents, a man worth an estimated $1.2 billion. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder and CEO of Aquaflow Dynamics." The camera panned to a silhouette standing in the shadows of the studio, and the room held its breath, waiting for the face of God to be revealed. The silhouette on the television screen began to move, stepping out of the shadows and into the blinding lights of the studio. But then the feed cut away. It transitioned to a pre-recorded segment, a high-definition cinematic sequence that looked like the trailer for a summer blockbuster. The camera soared over the Manhattan skyline, banking sharply around gleaming skyscrapers before dipping down toward a private helipad perched atop a black glass tower. A sleek military-grade helicopter touched down its rotors, slicing the air with a rhythmic thrum that vibrated through the speakers of my parents' expensive surround sound system. The door of the helicopter slid open. A man stepped out. He was not wearing a suit. He was wearing a fitted charcoal t-shirt and work boots, the uniform of a man who built things rather than just talked about them. He walked toward the camera, with a stride that was powerful and undeniable. He reached up and removed his aviator sunglasses, looking directly into the lens with piercing dark eyes. The room froze. The air left the lungs of everyone present. It was a collective gasp that sucked the oxygen right out of the house. Because the face on the screen was not a stranger. It was not a foreign oligarch. It was the man sitting 10 feet away from us, leaning casually against the wall, with a glass of cheap wine in his hand. Then the graphic appeared at the bottom of the screen. It was a bold silver banner that confirmed what their eyes were refusing to believe. The text read, "Dante Williams, founder and CEO, Aquaflow Dynamics. Estimated net worth $1.2 billion. The silence in my parents' living room was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. You could hear the wind outside. And then you heard the sound of destruction. Jasmine's fingers went numb. The crystal champagne flute she had been holding slipped from her manicured grip and hit the hardwood floor, shattering into 1,000 diamonds. The sound was like a gunshot, but nobody flinched. Nobody moved. They were paralyzed. My father's mouth hung open, his unlit pipe falling from his lips and tumbling onto the carpet, spilling ash that he did not bother to clean up. My mother looked as if she had been slapped across the face by a ghost. She looked from the TV to Dante, then back to the TV, her brain short-circuiting as it tried to reconcile the plumber she had forced to use the back door with the billionaire being celebrated on national television. But Brad, oh Brad, his reaction was a work of art. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like his blood had evaporated. His arrogant smile, the one he had worn just seconds ago while bragging about his imaginary mentorship, curdled into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He began to shake. It started in his hands and spread to his knees until his entire body was vibrating with the realization that he had just spent the last hour insulting the most powerful man in his industry. On the screen, the scene cut to an interview setting. The host sat across from Dante, looking at him with undisguised admiration. "Mr. Williams," she asked, her voice echoing in the silent living room. You have operated in stealth for a decade. You have over 50 patents. You control the water filtration systems for 3 major cities. Why the secrecy? Why hide behind the facade of a blue-collar worker? Dante on the screen leaned forward, his expression serious. Because in this world, people judge you by your title, not your character. I wanted to build a company based on competence, not ego. And personally, I wanted to know who my real friends were. When you wear a suit, everyone wants to shake your hand. When you wear work boots, you see who people really are. The host nodded, leaning in. And what have you found? What is the one thing that the CEO of Aquaflow hates more than anything else? The camera zoomed in on Dante's face. His eyes on the screen seemed to lock directly onto Brad's terrified eyes in the living room. Hypocrisy, the TV. Dante said, his voice cold and hard. I detest liars, and I have zero tolerance for small men who look down on the people who do the real work. There is more honor in cleaning a pipe than in stealing credit for building it. The interview continued, but nobody was listening to the words anymore. The reality was setting in. The weight of their cruelty, their mockery, and their arrogance was crashing down on them all at once. Every insult they had hurled at him, every dirty look, every plate of scraps they had offered him, it was all playing back in their minds on a loop. In the corner of the room, the real Dante moved. The sound of him placing his wineglass on the side table was soft, but it made everyone jump as if a cannon had gone off. He stood up slowly, brushing an invisible speck of dust from the lapel of his tuxedo. He did not look angry. He looked serene. He looked like a judge who had just heard the final piece of evidence and was ready to deliver the verdict. He walked into the center of the room, blocking the view of the television. He looked at my mother, who was trembling. He looked at my father, who was staring at the floor. And finally he turned his gaze to Brad. Dante adjusted his cufflinks, a slow, deliberate motion that drew every eye in the room. He tilted his head slightly, a small, dangerous smile playing on his lips. That was a pretty good answer, don't you think, Brad? I tried to remember the advice you gave me at the Harvard Club, but I must have forgotten it. Did I get the part about the plumbing right? Brad blinked rapidly, his face slick with sweat that had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. He pointed a shaking finger at the television screen, where the interview was still playing, then back at Dante. This is a trick, he stammered, his voice cracking and pitching high like a frightened child. It is a deep fake. I read about this in a magazine. You hired a hacker to put your face on the real CEO. That is it, isn't it? You are sick, Dante. You went to all this trouble just to embarrass me in front of my family. You are nothing but a plumber with a cheap computer program. He looked around the room, desperate for someone, anyone, to believe him. Jasmine nodded frantically, her mascara running, clinging to his delusion, because the alternative was too terrifying to accept. Yes, she cried out. That has to be it. Mom, Dad, do not believe him. Dante is a liar. He fixes toilets. He does not fly helicopters. Dante didn't bother to argue. He didn't even look at Brad. He just took a slow sip of his wine and checked his watch again. Right on time, he murmured to no one in particular. As if on cue, Brad's phone began to vibrate violently against the glass coffee table. The sound was harsh and jarring in the silent room. The screen lit up, buzzing and dancing across the glass. We all looked down. The caller ID displayed a name that made Brad's knees buckle. It was the managing director of his investment firm, the big boss. The man Brad had claimed was his best friend. Brad lunged for the phone, his eyes wide with a sudden desperate hope. He thought this was his lifeline. He thought his boss was calling to congratulate him on the TV appearance, to validate his lies and put Dante back in his place. He snatched the phone up with wet, trembling hands. Hello, Sir Brad. Breathless, trying to sound confident but failing miserably. I am watching the show right now. Isn't it incredible? I was just telling everyone how we... His hands were shaking so badly that his thumbs slipped. Instead of bringing the phone to his ear, he accidentally hit the speaker button. The voice that erupted from the tiny device was not congratulatory. It was a roar of pure white-hot fury that filled the entire living room. "Shut up, Brad!" the voice screamed, distorted by the speaker, but unmistakably enraged. "I am watching American Titans right now, and I just received a fax from Aquaflow's legal department. Is that our client, Mr. Williams, the man whose company we have been trying to acquire for 6 months, standing in your in-laws' living room?" Brad went pale. Sir, let me explain. It is a misunderstanding. He is just... Did you ask the CEO of a billion-dollar company to clean your shoes? The boss bellowed. Because Mr. Williams just pulled the contract. He pulled everything, Brad. The merger is dead. He said he refuses to do business with a firm that employs, and I quote, arrogant amateurs with no moral compass. Brad opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air on dry land. "You are fired." "Sterling," the voice continued, cold and final. "Effective immediately. Security is already clearing out your desk. Do not bother coming in. And have your lawyer ready because we are suing you for breach of fiduciary duty and gross negligence. You just cost this firm the biggest commission in its history. You are done in this town. You are finished." The call ended with a sharp click that sounded like a guillotine dropping. Brad dropped the phone. It clattered onto the floor, echoing in the dead silence. He looked at Dante, his eyes wide and hollow, stripped of every ounce of arrogance he had worn just minutes ago. He looked like a man who had just watched his own funeral. From the corner of the room, a soft thud broke the silence. My mother let out a strangulated whimper, her eyes rolling back in her head. Her knees gave way, and she crumbled to the floor in a heap of polyester and regret. It was a theatrical faint, the kind she used to pull when credit card collectors called the house, but this time nobody moved to help her. Jasmine stared at her husband with horror, realizing the Hamptons' house and the luxury life had just evaporated into mist. My father sat frozen in his armchair, a statue of shock. His mouth hung open, his jaw practically unhinged. The unlit pipe he had been holding slipped from his slack fingers and tumbled onto the carpet, spilling ash that he did not even notice. He looked from the black screen of his phone to the man standing in his living room, his brain unable to compute that the son-in-law he had called a failure, the man he had tried to swindle, had just destroyed his golden boy with a single phone call. Dante set his glass down on the table. The sound was deliberate and calm. He did not gloat. He did not smile. He simply walked over to the front door, his footsteps heavy and authoritative. "That was just the appetizer," Dante said, his voice cutting through the sound of my mother's soft sobbing on the floor. "Now for the main course." He opened the front door wide. A gust of night air blew into the stifling room. Standing on the porch was not a guest. It was a man in a sharp gray suit holding a thick stack of red envelopes. "Come in, please," Dante said, stepping aside to let the man enter. "My in-laws have some documents to sign." The man in the gray suit did not look like a courier. He moved with the silent, predatory grace of a corporate executioner. He stepped over the spot where my mother was still sobbing on the carpet, ignoring her completely, and walked straight toward my father. The room was so quiet that the sound of the heavy leather shoes clicking against the hardwood floor echoed like gunshots. In his hands he held a thick dark red envelope sealed with an official-looking stamp. It was the color of blood, the color of a warning, the color of the end. He did not say a word. He simply extended his hand and held the envelope out to my father. My father looked at the envelope as if it were a poisonous snake. His hands, which had been trembling since the revelation on the television, shook violently as he reached out to take it. He fumbled with the seal, his fingers clumsy and numb with shock. When he finally tore it open, a stack of legal documents slid out. He adjusted his glasses, squinting through his confusion, trying to make sense of the dense legal jargon. I watched his eyes scan the first page. I watched the moment the words actually registered in his brain. His face, which had been pale, turned a sickly shade of gray. He looked up at Dante, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. This says notice of immediate foreclosure," my father whispered, his voice barely audible. But we have 30 days. The bank said we had 30 days to cure the default. Dante took a step forward, his hands clasped behind his back. The bank did say that, he replied calmly. But banks are in the business of minimizing risk. When they saw that you had taken out a second mortgage to fund a high-risk investment account that just imploded, they classified your loan as a toxic asset. They wanted it off their books immediately. They were preparing to auction this house off to the highest bidder next Tuesday. You would have been evicted by the sheriff. My mother stopped crying. She pulled herself up to a sitting position, clutching her chest. But we are Vances, she wailed. We have lived here for 20 years. They cannot just sell our home. They already did. Dante said, his voice cold and devoid of pity. They sold the debt 3 months ago. I know because I am the one who bought it. A gasp went through the room. My father looked back down at the papers. He flipped to the second page where the new creditor was listed. There, in bold black ink, was the name that sealed their fate. Aquaflow Asset Management. You own our mortgage, my father stammered. I own the deed, Dante corrected him. I bought the note at full face value because I wanted to save you. When I saw that you were drowning in debt to give Brad money, I stepped in. I instructed my legal team to hold off on the foreclosure. I was going to pay off the arrears myself. I was going to let you live here for the rest of your lives rent-free. I was going to rip these papers up tonight and give them to you as a gift. Dante paused, letting the weight of his generosity hang in the air. He walked over to where the 2 dirty aprons still lay on the floor, the ones my mother had thrown at us. He looked down at them, then back at my parents. But then you invited me here tonight. You told my wife she looked like a child playing dress-up. You threw these rags at us and told us to wash your dishes. You mocked my work. You tried to humiliate the only 2 people in the world who were actually trying to help you. Dante shook his head slowly. I can forgive a lot of things. I can forgive the fact that you didn't come to our wedding. I can forgive the insults. But I cannot forgive the fact that you value a liar in a leased Porsche more than your own daughter. You made your choice tonight. You chose appearance over substance. Now you have neither. My father dropped the papers. They scattered across the floor like dead leaves. Dante, please, he begged, his voice cracking. We didn't know. We are family. You can't do this. I am not doing this to you, Dante said, stepping back to stand beside me. He wrapped an arm around my waist, pulling me close. You did this to yourselves. You bet your house on a man who doesn't exist, and you treated your safety net like garbage. Dante checked his watch one last time. He looked at the lawyer, who nodded and pulled a digital timer from his pocket, setting it on the coffee table. The red numbers began to count down. This property is now a corporate asset of Aquaflow Dynamics, intended for redevelopment into a shelter for at-risk youth, Dante announced, his voice ringing with finality. As the legal owner, I am exercising my right to immediate possession. You have exactly 24 hours to remove your personal belongings and vacate the premises. If you are not gone by this time tomorrow, security will escort you out. I suggest you start packing. You have a long night ahead of you. The tide in the living room turned so fast it was almost dizzying. Just minutes ago, these people had been looking at Dante and me with sneers of superiority, judging our clothes and our station in life. But the moment the reality of Dante's billion-dollar net worth settled in, the atmosphere shifted violently. It was a masterclass in human hypocrisy. I watched as the same cousins who had ignored my texts for years suddenly elbowed each other, whispering loudly enough for us to hear. I always knew there was something different about him. One cousin muttered, nodding sagely, as if he had possessed some secret insight all along. He just had that quiet confidence, you know. He never needed to brag like Brad. That is the mark of true wealth. His wife, who had literally laughed when I walked in, nodded in agreement. Exactly. I told you we should have sent them a nicer wedding gift. Do you think it is too late to invite them to the summer barbecue? The room became a theater of the absurd. The guests began to physically distance themselves from my parents, and Brad creating a wide, empty circle around the fallen Golden family. It was as if failure and bankruptcy were contagious diseases, and they were terrified of catching them. My mother looked around, reaching out a trembling hand toward a woman she had known for 30 years, a woman she sat next to in church every Sunday. Martha. My mother pleaded, her voice thin and desperate. Surely you don't believe this. It is all a misunderstanding. Martha didn't even make eye contact. She adjusted her handbag, looked at the ceiling, and took a large step away. I think I left my oven on, Brenda, she mumbled. I really must be going. This seems like a private family matter. Then came the direct approaches. A woman I barely recognized, a distant aunt named Linda, who had famously called my marriage a disgrace to the bloodline, came bustling through the crowd. She had a manic, terrified smile plastered on her face. She practically shoved my father out of the way to get to Dante. "Oh, Dante, sweetheart," she gushed, throwing her arms open as if she were greeting a beloved son returning from war. "I am just so relieved the secret is finally out. You know, I was just telling Uncle Joe last week that you remind me of a sleeping dragon. I said that boy is a dragon in the clouds just waiting to reveal his scales. I knew you were destined for greatness. I just knew it." She lunged forward, attempting to wrap Dante in a hug, clearly hoping that if she squeezed him hard enough, some of his power might rub off on her. It was pathetic. It was nauseating. Dante didn't flinch, but he didn't welcome it either. He simply raised his forearm, creating a solid, impassable barrier between them. He didn't push her, but the rejection was colder than ice. He looked down at her with an expression of mild curiosity, like a scientist observing a rat in a maze. "Aunt Linda," Dante said, his voice smooth and carrying effortlessly across the room. "I seem to recall you asking me to fix your garbage disposal last Thanksgiving, and when I finished, you told me to use the service entrance because you didn't want the help walking on your white carpets. Please do not try to rewrite history just because you see a bank balance. My memory is excellent." Linda turned a shade of crimson that clashed horribly with her dress. She stammered something unintelligible and scurried away, disappearing into the crowd of people who were now frantically checking their phones and heading for the door. The party was over, the Vances were finished, and nobody wanted to be around for the funeral of their reputation. My parents stood alone in the center of the room. The eviction papers lay at their feet like a tombstone. My father looked old, defeated, his arrogance stripped away to reveal a frightened, foolish man. My mother was weeping silently, not for the loss of her relationship with me, but for the loss of the house, the status, and the lie she had lived for so long. But the most satisfying collapse was Brad. He stood by the fireplace, isolated. The phone that had delivered his termination was still lying on the floor where he had dropped it. He looked at the empty room. He looked at Jasmine, who was staring at him with a mixture of hatred and horror, realizing her ticket to the high life had just been canceled. He had no job. He had no allies. He had no future. He looked at Dante, the man he had bullied, the man he had forced to clean up after him, the man who now held the keys to his entire existence. Brad took a shaking step forward, then another. His legs seemed to lose their structural integrity. He didn't walk, he crumbled. He sank to his knees on the expensive Persian rug he had once bragged about. He crawled the last few feet until he was right in front of Dante's polished tuxedo shoes. Tears streamed down his face, ruining his spray tan, making him look like a melting wax figure. "Dante, please," Brad choked out, reaching for the hem of Dante's trousers with trembling hands. "I am sorry. I didn't know. You have to help me. I have nothing. Please, we are brothers." As Brad wept on the floor, clinging to the hem of Dante's trousers like a drowning man, the silence in the room was shattered by a sound that used to make me flinch. It was my sister Jasmine, but this time her voice did not hold the sharp, condescending tone I had known my entire life. It was a high, thin wail of pure desperation. She realized that her husband was a fraud, her parents were homeless, and her entire future had just dissolved into smoke. In that moment of absolute panic, she did what she had always done. She looked for me to fix it. Jasmine rushed across the room, pushing past our stunned parents. She threw herself at me, grabbing my hands with a grip that was painfully tight. Her face was a mess of smeared mascara and tears, her perfect composure shattered. "Maya, please," she sobbed, her nails digging into my skin. "You have to tell him to stop. You cannot let him kick Mom and Dad out. You cannot let him ruin Brad. We are family, Maya. We are sisters. We shared a room. We have the same blood. You cannot destroy us just because you are angry. Talk to your husband. Please, tell him to show some mercy." I looked down at her. For years this display of emotion would have worked. I would have felt guilty. I would have crumbled and given her whatever she wanted just to keep the peace. But tonight, looking at her frantic, terrified eyes, I felt nothing. The part of me that craved her approval had died the night she lied about being in a car accident to steal my money. I gently but firmly pulled my hands away from hers. Jasmine stumbled back slightly, looking at me with shock. I reached into my small clutch purse and pulled out my phone. Family. I repeated the word, tasting strange on my tongue. "You want to talk about family? That is interesting, Jasmine, because just last week when you thought I was not listening, you had a very different definition of what our sisterhood meant." I tapped the screen and opened a saved audio file. It was a voicemail she had accidentally left me a week ago. She had pocket-dialed me while complaining to her friends at brunch, unaware that her cruel words were being recorded for posterity. I held the phone up to the silent room and pressed play. Jasmine's voice, clear and dripping with arrogance, filled the air. "God, Maya is so pathetic," the recording sneered. "I almost feel bad taking the inheritance money, but honestly, she does not need it. She is just a background character in my life. She was born to be the ugly duckling so I could look even better. Let her pay for my lifestyle. That is what she is there for, to be the help." The recording ended with the sound of her friends laughing. I lowered the phone. Jasmine's face had gone paper white. She opened her mouth to speak to deny it, but no sound came out. My parents looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "You were right, Jasmine," I said softly. "I was born to be the background. I spent my whole life making myself small so you could shine. I absorbed the insults, the neglect, and the cruelty, just so you could feel special. But you forgot one thing about background characters. We see everything." I took a step closer to her. "And tonight, I am done being your backdrop. I am going to be the main event. You said I was born to be the background for your life. Well, consider this my final performance. I am going to be the background for your total failure." Jasmine let out a sob, covering her face with her hands. But I was not finished. I turned my attention back to Brad, who was still kneeling on the floor looking up at us with watery, fearful eyes. He looked pitiful. He looked like a victim. But I knew better. "And speaking of failure," I said, turning to face the room, "there is one more thing you should know about your perfect husband, Jasmine. You are crying because you think you just lost your money. But you actually lost your marriage a long time ago." I nodded to Dante. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He handed it to me. I walked over to the coffee table right where Brad's phone was still lying and dumped the contents of the envelope onto the glass surface. Photos spilled out. Dozens of them. They were high-resolution images taken by the private investigator Dante had hired weeks ago to do due diligence on Brad's finances. But the investigator had found more than just debt. The photos showed Brad. But he was not at work. He was not at client meetings. He was at hotels. He was at intimate dinners. And in every single photo, he was with a different woman. A blonde in a red dress, a brunette at a casino, a redhead on a boat. The room gasped collectively. My mother let out a sharp cry. Jasmine froze. She looked down at the photos scattered on the table, her eyes widening in horror as she recognized the locations, the dates, the lies he had told her about working late. Brad scrambled to cover the photos with his hands, shouting incoherently, "No, no, put those away. That is not what it looks like. Jasmine, baby, listen to me." But it was too late. The evidence was sprawled out in glossy color for everyone to see. I looked at my sister, whose world was disintegrating second by second. "He did not just steal your parents' money, Jasmine," I said, my voice cold and final. "He stole your dignity. You called me stupid for marrying a plumber, but at least my husband comes home to me at night. Yours belongs to everyone else." The silence that followed the revelation of the photographs lasted only a second before it was replaced by a sound I had never heard from my sister. It was a primal scream of rage that seemed to tear itself from the very bottom of her lungs. Jasmine did not cry anymore. She lunged. She threw herself at the man she had worshipped just minutes ago, her manicured nails aiming for his face with an intent to maim. Brad tried to shield himself, stumbling backward into the coffee table, sending the glossy evidence of his betrayal flying into the air like confetti. "Get off me!" he yelled, scrambling on the Persian rug, but Jasmine was relentless. She was not just hitting him for the cheating. She was hitting him for the lie, for the humiliation, for the loss of the future she thought she had secured. She struck him with her fists, screaming that he was a monster, a fraud, a parasite. My father finally moved, scrambling to pull his daughter off her husband, while my mother sat on the sofa rocking back and forth, staring at the wall, as if her mind had simply shut down to protect itself from the reality of her life collapsing. The living room, usually so pristine and controlled, had turned into a brawl. A vase was knocked over. Wine stained the white carpet. The image of the perfect family had not just cracked, it had been pulverized. Dante watched the chaos with a calm detachment. He did not step in to break up the fight. He did not look horrified. He looked like a man watching a building implode after a controlled demolition. He simply raised a hand and signaled to the security team waiting by the front door. Two large men in dark suits, who had been waiting for his command since we arrived, stepped forward into the room. Dante pointed a finger at Brad, who was currently cowering on the floor behind a chair, trying to protect his expensive suit from his wife's wrath. "Please remove the trash from my property," Dante said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the screaming instantly. The security guards moved efficiently. They did not ask questions. They grabbed Brad by the arms, hauling him up like a sack of flour. He kicked and screamed, his feet scrabbling for purchase on the floor he no longer had any right to stand on. "Wait," Dante called out just as they dragged Brad toward the threshold. The guards stopped. Brad looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes, thinking perhaps Dante was going to show mercy. Dante walked over to the corner of the room where my mother had thrown the dirty aprons at us when we first arrived. He bent down and picked one up. It was stained and wrinkled, a symbol of the servitude they had tried to force upon us, a symbol of how small they wanted us to be. Dante walked back toward me. He knelt down on one knee in front of me, ignoring the gasps of the few remaining relatives huddled in the corners. With a tenderness that made my throat tighten, he used the hem of the dirty apron to gently wipe a speck of dust from the toe of my emerald green heels. He treated me like royalty in the middle of a war zone. It was a gesture of absolute reverence, a silent declaration to my family that the woman they tried to make a servant was his queen. Then he stood up, crumpled the dirty cloth into a ball, and walked over to Brad. "You dropped your dignity," Dante said, his voice flat and cold. He tossed the apron into Brad's face. "Take it with you. You are going to need something to wear for your new life." The guards dragged Brad out into the night, his pleas fading into the distance. The room fell silent again, save for the sound of my mother's weeping and Jasmine's jagged breathing. My parents looked small. They looked broken. They sat amidst the wreckage of their pride, surrounded by foreclosure papers, scattered photos of infidelity, and shattered glass. My father looked up at me, his eyes pleading for me to fix it, to offer money, to offer a solution, to be the dutiful daughter one last time. But I had nothing left to give them. I looked at the house that had never felt like a home, and I felt a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't realized I was carrying for 29 years. I took Dante's arm. We did not say goodbye. There was no need. We simply turned around and walked out the front door, stepping over the threshold into the cool night air, leaving the door wide open behind us, letting the wind blow into the ruins of the Vance legacy. 1 month. That is all it took for the Vance dynasty to crumble into dust. 30 days ago, my parents were sipping champagne in a mansion they did not own, looking down on the world. Today, they are living in a 2-room walk-up apartment on the south side of the city, a neighborhood my mother used to lock the car doors when driving through. The wallpaper in their new living room is peeling, damp patches bloom on the ceiling like bruises, and the heating radiator rattles like a dying engine all night long. My father, who used to spend his mornings polishing his golf clubs and lecturing me on fiscal responsibility, now spends his days arguing with a slumlord about the lack of hot water. He has aged 10 years in 4 weeks. His posture is gone. His arrogance has been replaced by a permanent bewildered hunch. My mother has it even worse. She stopped going to church. She could not bear the pitying whispers of the women she used to sneer at. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she sits by the chipped window frame for hours staring at her silent phone, waiting for a call that will never come. She still thinks this is a nightmare she will wake up from. She still believes that any moment now I will come bursting through the door with a checkbook and an apology ready to restore her to her throne. But the only things arriving in their rusted mailbox are final notices and rejection letters for the loan applications they desperately file every morning. And then there is Jasmine. My sister, the golden child, who believed she was too fragile to work, learned the hardest lesson of all. Her divorce from Brad was not the high-profile settlement she expected. Since Brad had 0 assets and millions in debt, there was nothing to split. She walked away with nothing but her maiden name and a suitcase of designer clothes she had to sell at a consignment shop just to pay a security deposit on a studio apartment. Last week, a former high school classmate saw her. She was not brunching at the plaza. She was wearing a polyester green vest, scanning groceries at the discount supermarket 3 towns over. When the classmate said hello, Jasmine didn't smile. She lowered her head, letting her hair fall over her face to hide the shame, and mumbled that the total was $40. The princess had become the peasant, and there was no prince coming to rescue her this time. Brad fared the worst, exactly as he deserved. The investigation into his trading activities was swift and brutal. It turns out that lying to your bosses about a billion-dollar merger is not just a fireable offense. It is securities fraud. He is currently out on bail wearing a chunky ankle monitor that hums every time he steps too close to the perimeter of his parents' basement where he is crashing. His face is plastered across the financial news, not as a titan of industry, but as a cautionary tale of greed and incompetence. The man who mocked Dante for getting his hands dirty now faces 10 years in a federal prison, where the only thing he will be trading is cigarettes. They tried to reach me, of course. Desperation makes people persistent. My mother tried to call from a payphone when I blocked her number. My father wrote a 6-page letter detailing his sudden health issues, blaming his high blood pressure on my cruelty. Jasmine even showed up at the lobby of my old office building screaming at the receptionist that she wanted to see her sister, that she had rights. But they never got through. They never heard my voice. Instead, they received a certified letter from Dante's legal team. It was a permanent no-contact order. It stated clearly that any further attempts to communicate with me or my husband would be met with immediate legal prosecution for harassment. It was the final wall. I had bricked up the door to my past life, and I threw away the trowel. While they were drowning in the consequences of their own choices, I was stepping onto a stage that I had dreamed of since I was a little girl. The grand ballroom of the City Arts Center was filled with the most brilliant minds in architecture and design. The chandeliers sparkled, but this time I belonged under them. The applause was deafening as the announcer spoke into the microphone, his voice booming through the hall. And now for the most prestigious honor of the evening. For her visionary work in sustainable urban design, and specifically for the revolutionary Maya Center, which breaks ground next month, the Architect of the Year Award goes to Mrs. Maya Williams. I stood up. I smoothed the fabric of my dress. Dante stood next to me, beaming with a pride that outshone every spotlight in the room. As I walked to the podium to accept the crystal trophy, I didn't feel like the scapegoat anymore. I didn't feel like the plumber's wife or the background character. I looked out at the sea of faces and I felt something I had never felt in my parents' house. I felt seen. I felt powerful. And as I gripped the podium ready to give my speech, I realized that the best revenge wasn't seeing them fall. It was rising so high that I couldn't even see them anymore. From the terrace of our penthouse, the city stretched out below us like a galaxy of electric stars. The wind up here was different. It did not carry the scent of exhaust or the noise of traffic. It was clean, crisp, and silent. For the first time in my life, I understood why people wanted to live in the clouds. It was not about looking down on the world. It was about finding a place where the chaos could not touch you. Inside the apartment was warm and filled with the soft glow of recessed lighting. It was not cluttered with gaudy statues or velvet furniture like my parents' house had been. It was open, airy, and filled with art that Dante and I had chosen together. But the most important thing in the room was not the furniture or the view. It was the stack of folders sitting on the mahogany desk in the corner. We had spent the last 3 hours reading through them. They were not business contracts. They were not blueprints for new skyscrapers. They were applications. After the collapse of the Vance family, Dante and I had made a decision. We were not going to hoard our wealth. We were not going to become the kind of people who measured their worth by the size of their yacht. We established the Vance Williams Foundation, a scholarship fund specifically designed for high-achieving students who had been estranged from their families or kicked out of their homes. We were looking for the scapegoats. We were looking for the black sheep. We were looking for the kids who had been told they were worthless because they didn't fit their parents' narrow definition of success. I picked up one of the files. It was from a 17-year-old girl in Chicago who wanted to study engineering, but her parents refused to pay for college because she wouldn't marry the man they chose. Reading her essay felt like looking in a mirror. I saw my own pain reflected in her handwriting. I saw the fear of being cut off, the desperate need for validation, and the crushing realization that love was conditional. But unlike me, this girl would not have to wait until she was 29 to find her freedom. I picked up a pen and signed the approval form. Full tuition, housing, a monthly stipend. She would never have to beg anyone for anything ever again. Dante walked out onto the terrace holding 2 mugs of tea. He placed one in my hand and wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me back against his chest. We stood there for a long time, just breathing, watching the lights of the city blink on and off. The silence between us was comfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who no longer had to fight to be understood. "You are quiet tonight," Dante said softly, his chin resting on the top of my head. "Are you thinking about them?" I didn't have to ask who he meant. Even here in this fortress of peace, the ghosts of my family sometimes tried to drift through the walls. I took a sip of tea, letting the warmth spread through my chest. A little, I admitted. I was thinking about how much time I wasted. I spent years trying to twist myself into a shape that would fit into their lives. I let them make me feel small. I let them steal my confidence. And for what? For a love that wasn't even real. Dante turned me around so he could look into my eyes. His face was shadowed, but his expression was fierce and tender. "Do you miss them, Maya? Do you wish things had ended differently?" I looked past him toward the horizon, where the dark outline of the new Maya Center was rising against the sky. I thought about my mother's voice, always critical. I thought about my father's indifference. I thought about Jasmine's betrayal. I searched my heart for a pang of longing for that old ache that used to cripple me. But I found nothing. The space where my family used to be was not empty. It was healed. "No," I said, and the truth of the words surprised even me. "I don't miss them. I don't miss the anxiety. I don't miss the judgment. I don't miss feeling like an imposter in my own home. I looked up at Dante. The only thing I feel is regret that I didn't leave sooner. I mourn the years I gave them. I mourn the girl who thought she had to earn the right to exist. But I am not sad that they are gone. I am relieved. Dante kissed my forehead. You are free, Maya. And you are going to use that freedom to make sure other kids get out sooner than you did. We went back inside. On the entryway table, sitting alone on a silver tray, was a single envelope. It had arrived earlier that afternoon. The doorman had brought it up with a look of apology, saying the sender had insisted it was urgent. It did not have a return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was my mother's. The script was shaky, less precise than it used to be, but the loops of the letters were unmistakable. I walked over to the table and picked it up. It felt light, flimsy. I could imagine what was inside: a plea for money, a guilt trip about their living conditions, a half-hearted apology laced with accusations that I was cruel for letting them suffer. Perhaps she would mention that winter was coming and their apartment was cold. Perhaps she would say that families should forgive everything, even the unforgivable. Dante watched me, his body tense, ready to take it from me if I asked him to. "Do you want to read it?" he asked. I held the envelope up to the light. I thought about the 17-year-old girl in Chicago, whose application I had just signed. I thought about the life I was building. I thought about the peace I had finally found. Opening this letter would be like opening a door to a room filled with toxic gas. It would let their voices back into my head. It would give them a foothold in my new world. I walked over to the fireplace. A small gas fire was dancing behind the glass screen. I opened the latch and felt the heat rush out to meet me. "No," I said. "I know what it says. It says they are sorry they got caught. It says they miss my money. It says nothing about missing me." I tossed the unopened envelope onto the flames. It did not explode. It did not make a sound. It simply curled in on itself, the paper turning black, the familiar handwriting distorting and vanishing into ash. I watched it burn until there was nothing left but a gray flake that floated up the chimney and disappeared into the night. I closed the glass screen and dusted off my hands. "What letter?" I asked, turning back to Dante with a smile. He smiled back, a genuine, dazzling smile that reached his eyes. "Exactly," he said. He took my hand and led me away from the fireplace, away from the ash, and toward the desk where the future was waiting for us. We had more applications to read. We had more lives to change, and we didn't have a single second left to waste on the past. It has been exactly 1 year since the rain-soaked day when I walked down the aisle of the old stone chapel alone. I remember the sound of my heels clicking on the cold stone floor, echoing in the silence, and the empty pews stretching out on my left side like a gaping wound. I remember the stinging notification on my phone from my mother telling me I was a disgrace, and the way the air tasted like rejection. But today, as we stand in the exact same spot, the air tastes like jasmine and vanilla, and the sun is streaming through the stained glass windows, casting pools of red and blue light onto the floor where I once cried. This time, the pews are not empty, they are overflowing. But there are no investment bankers checking their watches, and there are no social climbers looking to see who is wearing the most expensive designer label. The chapel is filled with the people who actually matter. There is the foreman from the construction site who taught Dante how to pour concrete when he was 18. There is the scholarship student from Chicago who just finished her first semester of engineering school with a perfect grade point average thanks to the foundation we started. There is the waiter from Le Jardin who refused to humiliate us that night. These are the people who saw us when we were invisible. I look at Dante standing at the altar waiting for me. He is wearing a tuxedo today, but he looks just as comfortable as he does in his work boots. He is holding my hands, the same rough, calloused hands that fixed my sink 5 years ago. My parents looked at those hands and saw failure. They saw dirt. They saw a lack of ambition. They were so blinded by the glitter of fool's gold like Brad that they missed the diamond standing right in front of them. They thought dignity was something you bought at a luxury car dealership, They did not understand that dignity is what you have when you can look at yourself in the mirror and know you have never compromised your soul for $1. Dante squeezes my hands and smiles, and it is the smile of a man who has kept every promise he ever made. He promised to build me a kingdom, and he did. Not the kingdom of glass and steel that rises above the city skyline, though that is beautiful too. He built me a kingdom of safety. He built a world where I am allowed to be myself without apology. He built a fortress of love that no amount of debt or family drama can ever breach. As we say our vows again, I realize that the anger I held onto for so long has finally evaporated. I used to want them to see this. I used to fantasize about my mother sitting in the front row, weeping with regret. I used to want my father to see the respect Dante commands in this room. But standing here today, I realize that their presence would only diminish the moment. They do not belong here long. This kind of joy is a frequency they cannot tune into. They are still tuned to the static of status and appearance. I turn to look at the guests, and I see smiles that reach the eyes. I hear laughter that isn't polite or forced. And I understand the most important lesson of this entire journey. We spend so much of our lives trying to please the people we share DNA with. We think that because we share a bloodline, we owe them our happiness. We think that family is a fixed point in the universe that we must orbit around no matter how much it burns us. But that is a lie. Family is not biology. Family is not a last name. Family is not obligation. Family is the people who stand by you when you have nothing in your pockets but a dream. Family is the people who defend your name when you are not in the room. Family is the people who celebrate your victories without jealousy and mourn your losses without judgment. My parents and my sister made their choice. They chose the facade. They chose the image, and in doing so, they lost the reality. They called my husband a disgrace, they mocked his profession, they ridiculed his clothes. They tried to erase him from the family picture because he didn't fit their aesthetic. But they were wrong. He is not a disgrace. He is the most honorable man I have ever known. He is a builder in a world of destroyers. He is a giver in a world of takers. They called him a stain on the Vance legacy, but they did not know that he was the only thing holding it up. They called him a peasant, but standing here today looking at the love in his eyes, I know the truth. He is my crown. He is the king of a quiet empire built on hard work and truth, and I am honored to be his queen. We walk out of the chapel, and this time we are not walking into a void. We are walking into a shower of white rose petals thrown by people who love us. We get into the old Ford truck, not the Rolls-Royce, because today we want to remember where we came from. As Dante starts the engine, that familiar rumble vibrates through the seat, and I laugh. It is the sound of freedom. We drive away from the chapel and the city skyline opens up before us. I think about the penthouse and the foundation, but mostly I think about the simple dinners we share. I think about the nights we spent dreaming when we had nothing. My family thought poverty was a sin. They thought struggling was shameful, but those struggles were the bricks that built our character. You cannot buy resilience. You cannot inherit grit. You have to earn those things in the trenches. My sister Jasmine never learned that. She was given everything and she valued nothing. She thought the world owed her a living. Now she is learning the hard way that the world owes you nothing but an opportunity to work. I hope one day she understands. I hope one day she finds her own way. But I cannot carry her anymore. I cannot set myself on fire just to keep her warm. To everyone watching this story, I want you to know something. If you are the black sheep of your family, I see you. If you are the one who is always criticized, the one who is never good enough, the one who is made to feel small, I need you to listen to me. Your worth is not determined by how well you fit into a toxic box. Your value is not a stock price that fluctuates based on your parents' approval. You are worthy simply because you exist. You are worthy because you are trying. Do not let them break you. Do not let them convince you that their rejection is a reflection of your character. It is a reflection of their limitations. They cannot love you because they do not know how to love themselves. They only know how to perform. But you are real, and being real is a superpower that will eventually attract the people who deserve you. It might be lonely for a while. You might have to walk down an aisle alone. You might have to spend holidays by yourself. You might have to rebuild your life from scratch. But I promise you the family you create will be infinitely better than the one you inherited. You will find your Dante, you will find your tribe, and one day you will look back at the people who underestimated you and you won't feel anger. You will just feel a distant pity because they missed out on knowing the incredible person you became. So please, if you are holding on to a relationship that hurts you because you think you have to let go, it is okay to choose yourself. It is okay to be the villain in their story if it means being the hero in yours. You are not alone. There are thousands of us walking this same path. We are the cycle breakers. We are the ones who say this stops with me. We are the ones who turn pain into power. Thank you for listening to my story. It was not an easy one to tell, but it was necessary. If you have ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to save your own soul, please let me know in the comments below. Share your story. Let's build a community here where the black sheep can finally feel at home. If this video resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that they are strong enough to walk away. Remember, your life belongs to you. Do not let anyone else hold the pen. Until next time, keep building your own empire, and never apologize for choosing your peace. This story teaches us that true family is defined by loyalty, not just biology. Maya spent years shrinking herself to fit her parents' toxic expectations only to realize that her self-worth was never up for negotiation. Being the black sheep isn't a curse. It is often a sign that you were destined to build a path your family couldn't understand. The greatest freedom comes when you stop seeking validation from people who are committed to misunderstanding you. If you have ever had to choose your own peace over toxic family ties, hit the like button and subscribe. Share your story in the comments below. You are not alone.